Where is Pink Floyd Animals? Roger Waters says a deluxe edition is on the way, but I don't think we'll see it anytime soon. I'll explain why next on Track by Track. Hey everybody, my name's Kyle and this is Track by Track, music reviews, news, and commentary. Thanks for tuning in today, and if this is your first time here, please take a second to click subscribe so that you won't miss future reviews and more. Near the end of October, Pink Floyd fans saw a special edition release of one of the band's albums, but it wasn't exactly the one most fans were hoping for. A Momentary Lapse of Reason was the group's 1987 album and their first without founding member Roger Waters. The new deluxe edition is fairly modest, but it does have some features for fans of that album. Of course, what most fans were hoping would materialize in 2021 was the long-awaited remixed deluxe edition of their album from 10 years earlier, 1977's Animals. Back in May, Roger Waters actually teased that it was possibly on the way and even shared the updated cover art. Now, as much as I love that album and would be thrilled to see a new deluxe edition finally released, I'm not holding my breath that it will happen anytime soon. And if anything, I think the recent release of Momentary Lapse of Reason is further evidence to support my skepticism. In this video, I'll explain why I think Pink Floyd is in no hurry to release the Animals Special Edition, and I'll offer my predictions on what I think they'll do instead. But first off, we need to answer the question, who is Pink Floyd? When Roger Waters left the group in 1984, it was his position that the band proper was null and void and would no longer exist. But David Gilmour disagreed, and more importantly, so did the courts. And thus, Pink Floyd would continue on under Gilmour's leadership, along with drummer Nick Mason. Keyboard player Rick Wright, who had been fired from the band during the making of The Wall, would also return, first as a session player on Momentary Lapse, and then as an official member for the Division Bell album. There's no denying the musical direction the group took following Waters' departure was very different than where they'd been when the final cut was released. And many fans would say that for them, without Roger Waters, there is no Pink Floyd. If you stop buying or listening to any of the group's output beyond 1983, that's certainly your prerogative. But the reality of the situation is that from that time forward, Roger Waters was no longer legally a member of Pink Floyd. Yes, he could provide input on how their catalog could be reissued, but only for the material created before his departure. And considering how bitterly he's spoken about his former bandmates in the years since the split, there's certainly not a lot of incentive for Gilmour and Mason to prioritize releasing older material featuring Waters. In fact, they've all but exhausted that pool of material already. In 2011 and 2012, we saw super deluxe immersion editions of Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and The Wall. Then in 2016, the massive early years box set was released, chronicling 1965 to 1972, which is essentially everything leading up to Dark Side of the Moon. So at this point, every Pink Floyd album featuring Roger Waters has already seen an expanded release, except for Animals and the final cut. And when you think about how Waters-centric those albums were, is it any wonder his former bandmates haven't fast-tracked the deluxe editions? Want further proof? Consider the fact that under Gilmour's leadership, selections from Animals and the final cut have never been part of the post-Waters Pink Floyd live shows. Waters plays songs from those albums regularly in his solo concerts, but Gilmour paid them no attention. And it's true, of course, that The Wall was an album heavily dominated by Roger Waters as well, but the success of that record certainly made it something Gilmour could not overlook in his Pink Floyd set lists. After all, how could he not play Comfortably Numb with his iconic guitar solo? So will we ever see an Animals or Final Cut Deluxe Edition? When it comes to the Final Cut, my answer is not a chance. This is a Pink Floyd album almost in name only. The record's subtitle makes that clear. A Requiem for the Post-War Dream by Roger Waters, performed by Pink Floyd. No way does David Gilmour want to revisit that music. Plus, Nick Mason barely appears on it, and Rick Wright is completely absent. But what about Animals? We know the album was remixed in 2018. But since then, it's languished in the Pink Floyd vaults, while Waters and Gilmour continue their decades-long public feud. Any hope of seeing the album's release may have actually been erased this past May when Waters essentially scooped his former bandmates by announcing details of the deluxe edition without their permission or participation. It was just the kind of arrogant Roger Waters power play that nearly destroyed the band in the early 80s, so it's hard to imagine Gilmour would be willing to let it slide again so easily. Certainly not for this album anyway. Fast forward 5 months from Waters' rogue announcement about Animals. There's no sign of the album whatsoever. But instead, Pink Floyd released a deluxe edition of their first post-Waters album, A Momentary Lapse of Reason. Technically speaking, none of the material is unreleased. All of it was part of the massive Later Years box set that came out in 2019. A box set that essentially compiled everything the band did without Waters. Roger had no say at all in how that music was handled. And so far, David Gilmour has played that to his advantage with multiple standalone Later Years releases. The remixed edition of The Delicate Sound of Thunder was released separately from the box set in 2020. And in early 2021, we saw CD and vinyl releases of the Live at Knebworth concert, also extracted from the box set. Along with Momentary Lapse of Reason, that's 3 significant Pink Floyd releases absent of Roger Waters in the past year alone. In fact, it's now been 5 years since Pink Floyd has reissued anything at all, including Roger Waters. And that was the aforementioned Early Years box set. I don't expect that to change anytime soon. In fact, I think what we can expect is to see more music from the Later Years box set released as standalone editions. The most obvious choice would seem to be a live CD and DVD combo release of Pink Floyd Live in Venice. This was actually released in 2020 exclusively to PBS donors during their annual pledge drive. The concert was broadcast on PBS stations, and viewers could snag copies of the CD and DVD by pledging their local station. Live in Venice has yet to be released to the masses, though, and while the video was included in the Later Years box set, the CD was not. So a CD and vinyl release of this show would actually be a first. Since the group has already packaged this material up for PBS editions, it seems like a mainstream release would be a no-brainer. Next, following on the heels of the 2020 remix of The Delicate Sound of Thunder concert video and album, it would make sense to do the same with Pulse. That concert was also restored for the Later Years box, and at the moment that's the only place to get it on Blu-ray. I don't expect they'll want to keep that material buried in the box for much longer, though. Releasing Pulse as a deluxe edition with the DVD and Blu-ray plus 2 CDs seems like an obvious choice, not to mention a vinyl release as well. Bonus points if the packaging includes the cool blinking light that was featured on the original 1995 edition. Mine's burned out. And what about The Division Bell? That album was actually released on vinyl multiple times in recent years, so there may or may not be much demand for that. But while the Later Years box included a surround sound mix of the album on Blu-ray audio, a CD version was not included. I think Pink Floyd could easily put together a new deluxe edition following the same template as Momentary Lapse of Reason, with the album on CD and a Blu-ray disc with a surround mix and some videos as well. Division Bell hits its 30th anniversary in 2024. Will they wait until then? My gut says we'll see it sooner. There's one more item from the Later Years set that I'd consider a maybe, but probably not, and that's a DVD and Blu-ray release of the Knebworth concert. For whatever reason, the band only released it on CD and vinyl in 2021, leaving the video exclusive to the box set. I have no idea why that decision was made, but the fact that they didn't release it alongside the CD makes me think it's probably not coming. And at that point, I'd say the well is run dry on the David Gilmour era of Pink Floyd. With nothing left to release, would Gilmour finally agree to revisit Animals? I think the answer is yes, but because that's what Roger wants, I think Dave is inclined to make him wait. And by proxy, we the fans must wait as well. Meanwhile, I'm not sure why Roger hasn't done more to mine his own material. Amused to Death was released with a surround mix in 2015, but what about the pros and cons of Hitchhiking and Radio Chaos? While Raj sits around complaining and teasing his tell-all autobiography that he promises will spill more dirt about Dave, he could be planning deluxe editions of his own material instead. Similarly, Gilmour could shift his attention to his solo work with reissues of his self-titled debut from 1978 or About Face from 1984. All of this is, of course, speculation. As a fan of Pink Floyd, Roger Waters, and David Gilmour, I'd love to have every single item I've just theorized about in my collection. But like most of you, a deluxe edition of Pink Floyd's Animals is certainly at the top of my list. And while we're making wishes, How about a deluxe final cut release and a DVD and Blu-ray of the Wall concerts as well? I don't think those last two will ever happen, but Animals will. Animals will come out when David Gilmour wants it to come out. I hope that's sooner than later. But I think more Gilmour-era Floyd is on the way first. That's my prediction for 2022. And by the way, I'd be happy to be wrong. Once again, my name's Kyle, and this has been Track by Track. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Plus, check out some of these other videos below that I think you might also enjoy. And of course, be sure to subscribe, because true music fans always want new releases the day they come out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.